Yes.
Okay, so good afternoon to everyone. Um, Here we have a very interesting session coming up, actually. Yeah, we have a very interesting session coming up because we have two very we have two very enlightened personalities with us today. We have Dr. Amechi Akwanya with us, joining us from Nigeria, far off but close to our hearts. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And we will also be joined by, yes, in fact, we have been joined by Professor Sinjini Bandyopadhyay as well. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. So we will have this as an interactive session. So first of all, let me introduce our very distinguished speakers. First of all, let me introduce my guest from Nigeria, Professor Amechi Akwanya. So Reverend Father Amechi Nicholas Akwanya is a fellow Nigerian Academy of Letters, fellow Institute of Industrial Administration, and is a professor of English and Literary Studies, University of Nigeria, Nsukka. He studied in the Republic of Ireland, where he obtained his PhD in 1989, then joined the University of Nigeria in 1991, attaining the rank of a professor in 1999. His research interests include comparative literature, African literature, discourse analysis, and literary theory, and the phenomenology of language, with publications running to more than 120 items, including a wonderful novel called Orimili, which was published by the Heinemann in UK. His most recent book is Literature and Aspects of Causality from the University of Nigeria Press, and he is also the editor of Okike, an African journal of new writing founded by, well, a giant of African writing, Chinua Achebe. So that is Sir's introduction. So now let me introduce ma'am as well. I have been a student of Professor Sinjini Bandyopadhyay in the University of Calcutta. So Professor Sinjini Bandyopadhyay is a professor of English in the, of course, in the Department of English. And she did her BA from the Lady Brabourne College and went on to complete her MA and PhD from the University of Calcutta. Some of her publications include The World Turned Upside Down, Evelyn Waugh's Decline and Fall in the Journal of the Department of English, University of Calcutta. Then Unsettled Settlers, a reading of Jane Coetzeer's Waiting for the Barbarians and Disgrace in Palaver, Proceedings of the Forum for African Studies. She has also published articles on Rasha Sundari Devi and Shunida Devi, translations of Sharoda Sundari Devi's Aptokatha and Mahabharata as well, which she has, I think, co-published with other professors of the department. So we have very, very distinguished speakers and panelists among us. So first of all, let me start off with Professor Amechi Akwanya. So, sir, talking about African literatures and talking about African literatures in English, something that our keynote speaker, Dr. Chandrani Bis, was also addressing. So, can you kindly talk about the origins of African writing in English and where it all began?
Yes, thank you very much. African writing in English, of course, everything goes back to the partition of Africa in 1884, 85. And before then, there had been coastal activity by the European powers. But with the partition of Africa in 1884, the colonists began active colonization, penetrating the interior and transforming it, and setting up institutions. So the first burst of African writing in English in these parts, colonized since 1884, came with what is called on-nature market literature. And that was in the 1940s. So it was a surprising activity. Young people who were who had basic literacy and were moving up in the ladder, the social ladder, school teachers, taxi drivers, booksellers, and people like that. They began to write and consume this kind of creative writing, which was very basic. So that was in the 1940s. Towards the late 1940s, like by 1948, for instance, one of the persons who became a big figure in African writing in English, Sinjini Bandyopadhyay, joined up. He published a number of things. One like African Nights Entertainment, another one When Love Whispers, and those both were in 1948. But in 1951, someone called Amos Tutola published what came to be regarded as a novel in the standard form of the word. So that was in 1951, and the title of the novel is The Palm Wine Drinkard. Again, Amos Tutola wasn't particularly well educated, but it was very creative. 1954, Sinjini Bandyopadhyay produced two more works. One, Burning Grass. Another one was about people of the city, both in 1954. And he continued to publish works that were recognizably literary, quite different from the chapbooks and pamphlets of Onitsha market literature. But the first, the great work that people know Achebe by, Things Fall Apart, came out in 1958. And from that time onwards, the people who had studied in the University College Ibadan, which was set up by the colonists, began to enter the scene. So people like Wole Soyinka, J.P. Clark, John Munonye, Elechi Amadi, and so on. So this was the trend. The 1960s, the process was blossoming, and this has led to the evolution of writing from one kind of style to another until the present. So that's the, in summary, the beginnings of writing in English in Africa. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that wonderful summary. So I was wondering if I can move on to my other panelist over here, Dr. Sinjini Bandyopadhyay. So there is an intersectionality, isn't it, between the African writings in English and Indian writing in English, because both of us have the shared history of colonization. So, madam, if you can now talk about a very similar thing, that is the beginnings of the Indian writing in English in the British colonial period. Madam, you're on mute. Shinji, madam, you're on mute. Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. See, today we talk about Indian writings in English. We teach such literatures in colleges and universities. But we must keep in mind that Indians writing in English, this body of literature started very early in the colonial period. Now, whether the sort of questions we ask today, whether it is a desire for selfhood, whether it is an attempt to carve out a modern new identity through these writings. Now, these issues really do not apply to the very early writings that we have, the English writings that were done by Indians. There was no artistic necessity that actually so rightly pointed out later on. English at that point of time was primarily a language for communication. And if we see, for example, we usually start reading poetry and novels and plays. But what is very important is there's a whole body of non-fiction prose as well, which really began Indian writing in English. And it is in this context, I'll just refer to one or two texts because the body is so huge. If we see the writings of Ram Mohan Roy, for example, the political speeches of Keshav Chandra Sen. Keshav Chandra Sen maintained a diary which was written in English, which is very interesting because a diary where you really pour out your own heart is written in English, and there's a difference between the sort of English that he uses in his public speeches and the English that he is using in his private diary. Now, one or two examples will suffice. Say, for example, when Ram Mohan Roy really started to think about the women's issues in India, he wrote two tracts which are extremely important in our study of the early writing in English. Now, if we have time, do we have a little bit of time, Nilanjan?
Yes, madam. Yes.
If you just look back into the beginnings of English studies or the introduction of the English language in India, we will see that this was not really imposed by the British. This is a very interesting fact, and we call this the great debate that is there between the British and the Indians regarding what sort of education and what should be the language for that education. Now, since the late 18th century, Indians desired to acquire the English language. And this is very, very, very significant because the first textbook which was written for the training up of Indians in the English language came out in 1797, which is a sort of book which compares English and Bangla and helps the Bengali to read English. When the Hindu College was, for example, established, it is said that a group of Indians, it was led by a person called Boidonath Mukherjee, who wanted English education for upper caste Bengali boys. And this idea of a language being imposed by a colonial ruler, along with it the burden of the culture that the language brought with it, the sort of issues that Gauri Vishwanathan points out in Masks of Conquest, that somehow I feel is not there in the very early writings that we have in English. And a very good example, as I said, is Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Keshav Chandra Sen. Or, for example, there is a very early narrative of about 17 pages, which is not really considered to be the first novel in that sense. It's called A Journal of 48 Hours of the year 1945. This book was written, or this narrative, this piece which came out in the Literary Gazette, Calcutta Literary Gazette. In 1835, the author, who is Kailash Chandra Dutt, this is the family to which later Toru Dutt and Oru Dutt will belong. He is looking more than 100 years ahead at a time when India will be free. And I'll just read out the first two or three sentences. The novel begins with, the people of India, and particularly those of the metropolis, had been subject for the last 50 years to every species of subaltern oppression. And the use of this word subaltern, for example, done far earlier than from a time we started subaltern studies. And what conviction, he then says that the dagger and the bowl were dealt out with a merciless hand, and neither age, sex, or condition could repress the rage of the British barbarian. So he had the courage to call the British a barbarian, though it is an imaginative piece of literature. Or when Ram Mohan Roy is writing his, when the Hindu College was to be established, he had written a letter. This is a decade before Macaulay's Minutes, 1835. He's writing a letter to Lord Amherst in 1823. And he's saying that we need Western education. We need modern science. We need philosophy. We need chemistry. And please, do not teach us only Sanskrit and philosophy and the Indian languages, because we will have to cope with you in the outside world. Okay, so what I feel, the earliest writings are basically non-fictional prose writings that we have in India, especially Bengal.
Right, that was a wonderful, introduction, as it were, to our discussion. I remember, in the University of Calcutta, we had this very interesting.
Hear you, Nilanjan. Can you be a bit louder?
Yeah, yeah. So, can you hear me? Yeah. So therefore, in University of Calcutta, I remember that we had this course called African Writing in English.
Yes.
And also Indian writing in English as well. So that this sort of bridges the gap, as it were. So now my next question, of course, is to Amechi sir, going back to him. Well, you see, I was, we all read this essay by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, where he is talking that when he entered a school of children, of African children, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o asked to name 5 flowers, they were actually naming European flowers, which they have encountered in the poetry of Wordsworth. But they could not name any African flower because the question of representation comes over there. So, sir, if I ask you the next question, that how would you describe the politics of African writing in English? Is it simply an attempt to write back at the empire, or there are more complex issues of identity? Sir, you're on mute. Kindly unmute yourself.
Yes, hello. Hello?
Yes. Yeah, we can listen to you, yes.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the history of writing is a very complex one. The history of writing in Nigeria. The experience reported by the last speaker about the English not wanting to teach English to Nigerians, to Indians, also happened in Nigeria. The colonial educational system was really, first of all, the work of the missionaries. The missionaries introduced education as part of their evangelizing mission. In Igbo land, the situation was peculiar. The missionaries came without a single word of Igbo. They didn't know where they were going. And they arrived at the bank of Onitsha, where that famous Onitsha market literature began. They arrived there in 1885. And what they did was to set up schools to enable them to learn Igbo. So they got the children together. They found in one of the reports, if they greeted the adults, they would greet back and pass on. But the children were interested to cluster around them, and so they set up schools to learn Igbo in order to be able to speak to the adult people. So that was it. But then they learned Igbo and taught English in exchange. The first missionaries, Catholic missionaries, for instance, were not even English. They were Alsatians, and Normans, French, German, and West French, nationals. So that was the Holy Ghost Fathers. Before the earliest ones were from these places, but later on, the Irish arrived. So the first task they assigned themselves was to learn Igbo, and they learned it through the children and taught the children English in the process. They then set up educational institutions. The first secondary school was set up in Lagos in 1859. The Church Missionary Society Boys High School in Lagos. The second was by the Methodist missionaries, and that was in 1878. It was for boys, a Methodist Boys High School, Lagos, 1878. The next year, they set up one for girls, Methodist Girls High School, Lagos, 1879. So the missionaries were interested in education of male and female. In fact, in some places, they set up primary schools for everybody, but had special schools for girls only as well. Now, the educational authorities were not interested in teaching English, but English was positioned as the language of power. And to access power, to access the amenities that went with power, people began to learn English and to demand that it be taught in the schools. So, so English then was incorporated in the educational curriculum. That was the means of upward mobility. Now, English. There was a conference in 1962, a conference of African writers and scholars in Kampala in 1962, and one fact that has made the difference with that conference, so that it is still discussed today, is the language question, which was raised by someone called Obiajunwa Wale. And Obiajunwa Wale gave a paper called The Dead End of African Letters. The Dead End of African Letters. And his argument was that African literature written in non-African languages was a contradiction in terms. There was no such thing as African literature written in another language. So that caused a big rumpus. And I must emphasize, the colonists were not interested. They were not interested in what people wrote or how they wrote or what language they wrote in. So the need for writing in English was homegrown. The issue raised by Obi Wale was much discussed, much debated. Some people thought that it didn't matter what language one wrote in. What mattered was the message, and messaging became a dominant in African conception, Nigerian conception of writing. Messaging, not really art as such. But Obiajunwa Wale is perfectly right that literature is an art that takes place by means of language alone. So the language in which a text comes into being is essential to that text. You couldn't shake out African literature from the language in which it came into being. But the dominant voice, in my view, not necessarily the correct one, was that it was about messaging. It was about messaging, whatever served the messages. It didn't matter. You could take the content and ignore the packaging. So Ngugi blaming the educational system for teaching African European flowers and all that, and not knowing African flowers and so forth. Yeah. It wasn't the fault of the educational planners. As we have said, they didn't plan to teach English. It was our people who wanted English, not for any reason except for upward mobility. social mobility, and that was what they wanted. They understood that this was a new world altogether. It's a new world. So to have a footing in that world, one needed mastery of English, and that was the attitude that drove our people. And again, there was very little that was available locally written in English. Onitsha market literature was not something that could be taught. As I said, the writers were barely literate in the most case, and they were writing things that were aimed at entertainment and dealt with certain kinds of problems that they saw. The way in which the urban system, the urban places that were developing, were pulling people from their roots and placing them in new situations where they had no antecedents, no way to manage, but had to depend on their wits, so to speak. So that was the kind of thing that they were writing. These were not things that could be introduced in the educational system. So the literature that was available was European English. Now, there was a book called Mr. Johnson, written by Joyce Carey. Chinua Achebe called it an appalling book. It was supposed to be about Africa, and Chinua Achebe identifies this as the work that convinced him of the need to write our own story, according to him. He said that the story we had to tell was not one that we could ask someone else to write for us, to tell for us, no matter how gifted that person was, no matter how well-intentioned. It was a story we had to tell ourselves. So that was a very important declaration, kind of. With that, African writing began to develop. Now, in the 1960s, the first burst of writing actually concentrated on telling our story, so-called our story. The cultural nationalism, people like Onoranzeku, writing consciously to package their culture and present to the world as something to be respected. John Munonye, Elechi Amadi, they all wrote in these 1960s, and there were many of them that produced works of that kind. There was one person called T.M. Aluko, and he wrote novels like One Man, One Machete, One Man, One Wife, Chief the Honorable Minister, and these were works which offered guidance, kind of, into the new world, offered people guidance. That concept of messaging was already in this. He was writing early in the 1970s, and a lot of his books were like that. So there was a big amount of messaging, but rather there was a big amount of writing back, telling our own story. There was a big amount of it, but of great importance also to the writers was communicating to their own people, giving them something like guidelines for surviving in the new world, or for making progress in the new world. So from this time onwards, the issues that began to dominate in the literature, continue to multiply and to complicate. And if you look at the matter from telling our own story, you can always say that everything that had been written was a way of telling our own story. You can always say that. But but there were other interests that were now being pursued. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. It was a wonderful sort of a roundup of how the African writers in English were trying to sort of deal with this whole idea of writing back. So, in fact, I remember, just to sort of create that bridge again, I remember that there was a letter which was written by Queen Elizabeth way back in the 15th century to Akbar. And Queen Elizabeth had had addressed Emperor Akbar as Ekebar, Ekebar, because she did not know the spelling of Akbar, perhaps. So, ma'am, just to sort of take on from where Amechi sir has left, that is the whole idea of writing back. So, how do you see this whole anxiety of the Indian writers in English writing in the colonizers' language, especially the writers from Bengal? How are they dealing with this anxiety of writing in the colonizers' language? Ma'am, you're on mute, so.
Yes, the anxiety, your question, please, the anxiety of writing in English, especially from?
Especially those who are writing in English from Bengal, how are they dealing with this anxiety of writing in the colonizers' language?
See, as I said, in India, especially, one very important difference between Indians writing in English and other colonized nations writing in English is the fact that India has thousands of years of written literature, whether it be Sanskrit, whether it be Pali, Persian, a few hundred, Arabic, the vernaculars. So that when, especially in the 19th century, I'll be talking primarily about the 19th century, when English really, English was being used by these writers, we'll have to, as Professor Akwanya said, that here too acquiring English was going up a social ladder. It was all about upward mobility. And upper class and upper caste people felt that acquiring this language, starting to write and speak in it, will give them better opportunities for social living. Now, naturally, they started learning this. Now, one very important point, this is a person, a scholar, a critic who had worked on Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Bruce Robertson. He pointed out a very important thing about these early writings, especially Ram Mohan Roy. He's saying that language, especially the English language for these early writers in English, was ideologically and culturally neutral. That is a very important observation to make, because even when Ram Mohan Roy is pleading for introduction of English education and instruction in English, it was for purposes other than literary. It was for purposes, political purposes, purposes of social reform. And therefore, in these non-fictional prose sections of English writing throughout the 19th century, I personally do not notice that sort of anxiety that writers may have about writing in English. Now, the question of writing back or subversion comes much later. That is almost a post-colonial phenomena. When Bankim Chandra, for example, is writing Raj Mohan's wife, he is using, like Ram Mohan, a very, very standard British English. And it is important, one reason why Bankim had to stop writing in English is that this negotiation between culture and language, you are trying to really put forth an Indian culture, specifically a Bengali culture, in an English language. Somehow, it seems, did not work for Bankim. I'll just talk about another 19th century author, Lal Bihari Dev. We know about him. apart from Govinda Samanto, which is a very important text, he had also a collection of Bengali folk tales written in English. If I have time, I'll just quote a few lines from the preface that he's writing to the folk tales of Bengal. This is Reverend Lal Bihari Dey. He says that it is a certain Richard Temple, who had read Govinda Samanto, the peasant life in Bengal, the English text, and had asked Lal Bihari Dey to collect folk stories of Bengal and put it in a sort of book form. And then he's writing, Lal Bihari Dey is writing in his preface to these folk tales, as I was no stranger to the Martian of Brothers Grimm, to the Norse tales so admirably told by the son, to Arneson's Icelandic stories translated by Powell, to the Highland stories done into English by Campbell, and to the fairy stories collected by other writers. And I believed that the collection suggested would be a contribution, however slight, to that daily increasing literature of folklore and comparative mythology, which, like comparative philosophy, proves that the swarthy and half-naked peasant on the banks of the Ganges is a cousin, albeit of the 100th remove, to the fair-skinned and well-dressed Englishman on the banks of the Thames. I readily caught up the idea and cast about for materials. So when you read a preface of that sort, you realize that he is attempting to just contribute something to world literature. He's just including Bengali folk tales with Norse tales, the tales of Brothers Grimm, and somehow he's also showing the sort of learning that he has, that he's acquainted with a whole lot of European literature. And very interesting about this collection of folk tales that he has. At the end of each tale, he translated the very, very popular Bengali refrain, Amar Kothati Phuralo, Note Gachti Muralo. At the end of each story, he uses that refrain, thus my story endeth, thus Notia Than withereth. So I'm trying to say that 19th century Indian, at least up to the 1960s and 1860s and 70s, this anxiety somehow I don't feel, something that is there, which is coming in early 20th century.
Thank you, madam, for that wonderful response. So now you're just trying to change the track a bit. So we are talking about the things about representation and how representation is taking place in world literature and in English. So this question goes to, of course, to Amechi sir, that how are the writers in Africa sort of negotiating with the native forms of literature while appropriating them with the Western forms of literature? Because we know that novel is basically a Western form. So how are the African writers negotiating with writing in a Western form about the African experience? Sir, you're on mute. Kindly unmute yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you. You can look at the history of writing in English in Nigeria as a history of progression from cultural assertions, so to speak, and representation of cultural things, increasingly to other issues that are contemporary and sometimes political, very often political, but things that are wrapped up in the novel form. Yeah, if we take the configuration of the individual and society as the norm of the novel, we'll see that in the Western novel, there is society, and is a huge force, which the individual very rarely is able to override. Sometimes he can dribble past society and achieve what he wants, but society is a huge force. And there really to stop him from aspiring to achieve his own personal aims, unless he can insert his aims, his own personal aims, into those of society. Now, the first novel form that we have, I'm thinking of Amos Tutuola. It was a strange form in which the individual as individual, so there was configuration of individual and society, but the individual was free. The work and all his novels, celebrated the freedom of the individual liberty in a striking way. That's not to say that that's how traditional society worked, but these works had a folk tale format also, in which traditional society, the institutions of traditional society were functioning, but another world was nearby and could open, at any time. And this new world that is strange does not come as a surprise, in Tutuola's traditional folk tale. So there is coming and going. This attitude, this way of writing, came in the past few years to be called magical narratives. But that's what, if you like, Nigerian novel writing came into being with. So the character could go and come between the human world and another world. And in the Tutuola's works, the individual was not constrained by either the human world or that other world. It's typical folktale model. But now the works that follow, the traditional novels that follow, some of them centered on traditional society and traditional institutions. They configured their sequences from these institutions. So occasionally, the world of another world that is not the physical one that everybody is familiar with will appear, but in these later novels of traditional society, the appearance of that other world is always surprising. It's always surprising. It's not like in Tutuola, where interaction was normal, kind of. This other world had its own rules, and in Tutuola, the individual could express himself totally without any restraint in the human world and in that other world. In the novels that we find, like Flora Nwapa, Idu is the name of one of her novels. There is that other world, and that other world is encountered by accident. It's not really meant for human eyes. And when one encounters it, one finds that it has its own rules, which may not be infringed by any means, and any infringement was fatal for the individual. You see that kind of world in some of Amechi Akwanya also. Now, this other world that was interacting with the human world was something really of an object of wonder, something to wonder at. Now, in Achebe's Arrow of God, we see what I would call a folktale moment, where an individual wrestler is said to have a back that has never known the ground. You know, nobody has ever thrown him in the human, and so he wrestles all over the human world and wins. Then he's still not satisfied, so he goes to the spirit world and throws a challenge, and they send him hungry, wiry, emaciated kind of spirit, not knowing that this is his chi. And this chi, takes him up and thrashes him and dashes his head against the stony ground, and his self-expression comes to an end. So, but it is cited in Arrow of God as instruction, as it's not the narrative is not structured on this format. It's like a proverb, monetary instruction, what not to do, how to be restrained, and how to be circumspect in what one does. Now, there was a huge event that happened in Nigeria, the Nigerian Civil War. It hasn't been given much credit for its impact on Nigerian writing, but it had major impact on Nigerian writing. All right. What we see is that after that war, the moral world collapses. That's what we see in the novel. The moral world collapses, and you will see confusion, you see corruption, you will see abuse of power, you see all kinds of things happening now without any restraint, kind of. So this is a new world, but it seems to me that it is the collapse that had happened by virtue of the war that we were now seeing the consequences in the social space. But the novels that we have in their interest in messaging would always find the individual blameworthy in every case of wrongdoing, every case of corruption, every case of social injustice, would find the individual blameworthy. So from this time onwards, after the Civil War, 1970 onwards, the tone of Nigerian writing had changed. It was definitely no longer the thing of traditional society in which the individual was free. Now the individual was under the constraints of social norms and rules, so he could be judged. His performance, his actions could be judged on the basis of extant laws and rules. So we still see that individual and society. It is working, but it is resembling more and more the Western novel. Where the power of society is really unchallengeable. So and we keep seeing this. Then the things after the 1970s and 80s and 90s, in fact, we begin to see other issues: female trafficking, migration, and environmental degradation. These begin to feature, and they are configured as in the novel suffrage, so that very, very rarely do we see an echo effect even of traditional society, traditional processes. Everything is now explained at the level of what is seen and what people do, and the interests that drive what they do, their profit motive, and all that at that level only. That's what's happening more and more now. Thank you.
I have an observation.
Yes, madam. Yes, yes.
Yeah, as it's a very enriching discussion,
Yeah, yeah.
and thank you, Professor Bandyopadhyay, and Sir Professor Akwanya. As Sir, you are pointing out, you are talking about the Biafran War, which was a
Yes.
major watershed in the history of Nigeria. And during that time, as I have read quite a few novels and done some research on it, that the women's roles were being subverted. A lot of them participated in the war, and the entire fabric of society changed to a considerable level. And as you very rightly and interestingly pointed out, much of these issues were reflected in novels like Cyprian Okwuensi's Survive the Peace, Elechi Amadi's Estrangement, and of course Puchi Emecheta's Destination Biafra. So in Destination Biafra, we see the figure of Debbie, who is modeled on, she's absolutely framing her life on the Eurocentric model, very liberated, independent-minded woman, and how she realizes when she goes into the battlefield and sees the Nigerian woman's real lives, that she understands. So there's a kind of a nativization happening at the end also. So thank you, sir. It was just an observation. Thank you, Sinjini ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Sinjini madam. Yeah, so my next question would be again to Professor Bandyopadhyay, of course. Ma'am, talking about this whole idea of appropriating Western forms and writing in the native space, or writing about the native experience, I remember the preface of Kanpur, where Raja Rao is saying that, like American writing in English, we also need to devise an Indian writing in English. And of course, as we know, that the first Indian novel in English is by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, Rajmohan's wife. So how do you look at this question of the language, and how and this whole idea of representation, and this whole question of appropriating the Western forms to suit Indian representation?
It is in Bengal specifically, because I'm talking about Bengal, because I read this area. In Bengal, it was a process which included a whole lot of things. You have suddenly the printing press coming in. This whole idea of printed books. 19th century sees a whole shipment of books which used to come regularly from England for people in the administration who wanted to read English books. And the Indian, the Bengali is introduced not only to the novel, but also other forms, like the autobiography too. The modern form of the autobiography is definitely a Western input. And if you have a bibliography of 19th century literature, you will find the numerous autobiographies that were written by or autobiographical pieces were written by both men and women. This potential of prose was something very new. You will know that the literature that we had was primarily non-prose in that sense. You had verse, you had epic, but not prose in the modern sense of the term. Now, once again, if you go back to Ram Mohan Roy, the tracts that he had written on the immolation of widows, very interesting reading, because he is using methods and styles which you have in both West and the East. Like he's using the form of the dialogue. Now, the way he is was very well acquainted with Western philosophy, you have the form in the dialogues of Socrates and Plato. Similarly, the form of the dialogue is also was also prevalent in Indian philosophy, where a thesis is put forward and there is a person to counter it until you come at a sort of what you call Siddhanta, the sort of conclusion that you come to. Now, when Ramohan Roy is writing, he has in mind both. And he's using the medium of a prose, a tract. The intention is to present this not only to the people, but also to the government. And he has a person who advocates concremation, who advocates sati, and another person who opposes sati. So an advocate and an opponent, and both of them quote from the traditional texts. One is quoting from Ongira, Rishi Harit, from Rigved, from Puran, and saying that this is part of Indian culture, that women must go to the funeral pyre. The opponent of sati goes on to quote Manu, to quote the Bhagavad Gita. You see, it's not simply appropriating a language. It is trying to find out a midway in the 19th century between the East and the West, in terms of subject matter, in terms of style, in terms of language, form, and then putting forth it to the public. The autobiography, similarly, you had a whole lot of hagiography. India was filled with hagiographies. And these hagiographies, the Harshachari, Chaitanya Charitamrita, it was always there. But the modern form of autobiography, where you start talking about your own self, that was something very new, and definitely the Indian picked up on it and started writing. And one thing also is to be remembered, that these biographies, the modern biographies, were a very important part of the curriculum in English schools. So that the whole form of the biography, the autobiography, the novel, it was the form was appropriated with an Indian subject matter and presented but what is important in early writings is that the reader should be a person who is equally acquainted with the English language, so that a bulk of the literature that was written in the 19th century and circulated and known and read was in the vernacular. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, madam. Thank you so much. So we are almost like approaching the end of our session. So now we are moving into the question of gender, because I suppose that is very important. So my question to Amechi sir would be the same, and the question that I have for Professor Bandyopadhyay after that will be the same. So to Professor Akwanya first, how do you see the role of the women writers in African writing in English, and how are they sort of reacting to this whole idea of the center margin conflict? Sir, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah. We can listen to you. Yes.
The women came into writing a bit late in Nigeria. Not the difference is not that dramatic, but the men started first, right? The earliest, women novelists, we have Laura Nwapa I've mentioned. Buche Mecheta, Zinab Al-Kali, and then in recent times we have many others, Chimamanda Adichie, Chika Onigwe, and so forth. Kaine Agari, and so on, many of them. So it was kind of a slow start. Some historical reasons probably account for this. I do not think it had to do with the educational system favoring the males, as sometimes said. Rather, tradition weighed in, so that even the females who went to school, when they had a suitor, the tendency was for their parents to say, well, this is your chance. go and get married, so they could leave school at that stage. So it took some time before women began to stay longer and longer and longer in school to complete their education to any level, and we see the outcome of that growth in women education in the output, the writing output. So the women have played a major role, especially since the last 3 or so decades. The first of these writers, like Flora Nwapa, she had books like One is Enough, and Itu I've mentioned already. From One is Enough, we are already dealing with some of the women issues, having children, having male children or not having children at all, and the problems that was causing in marriages. So we see so women in their traditional quote and unquote responsibilities, they were coming on then increasingly as an issue of stress that literary works meditated on and discussed. Now, in the women writing itself, we see a certain shifting of center from the cultural things towards the women issues themselves, women freedom, women ability to make autonomous decisions about their lives without waiting for or obtaining permission from either husband or anybody like that. We see more and more of that happening. Now, the women also have led the way in these recent issues. Women trafficking, obviously, women genital mutilation, environmental degradation, migration. They have tended to lead the way, and what has happened is that the center margin situation has followed this movement of writing. When you take the issue of environmental degradation, the center would not be the political capital of the country. Somehow, the political capital never featured, centrally in Nigerian writing as a source of movements as such. So, a nearby urban center was enough. In the case of environmental degradation in the Delta area, the biggest city nearby is Port Harcourt, and that tends to be the center as far as the text is concerned. Now, but so there's movement from the rural areas to the city and back again. The changes that are happening in the rural places are reverberating in the urban places in this major city, and the city is the source of this hardship that the local people are experiencing, and the hardship is changing, affecting them psychologically, affecting them their livelihoods, and affecting all kinds of things. And now, so the nearby urban system is the center, and the places where the oil spillage is happening is the margin, so to speak. Now, with the development of writing about trafficking and migration, the center moves to Europe, Europe and America. They become the center, and everything else is marginal. And so there is a model that the critics use for discussing migration: the push factor and the pull factor. So the push factor is in the margins, and the pull factor is in the center. So there is that kind of new relationship between the center and the margins, whereby the center is drawing people from the margins, people it does not want, but somehow it is drawing them, and because it doesn't want them, they are being destroyed, they are being oppressed, they are being crushed. Yeah. So the center margin tension has come full circle in the hands of women. When things fall apart, for example, the center is nearby. It is where the white man has set up his post, and from there decisions flow. So the white man is that expression of the center. And there's independence, and the white man has gone, and it's the political people and the political leaders who now constitute the center. But with migration and women trafficking, the white man has come back into view. He is once again at the center. Thank you.
Right, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So the question is the same for Professor Bandyopadhyay. The role of the women writers in India, especially women writers who are writing in English or in the Bhasha literatures from Bengal. Ma'am, you're on mute. You're on mute. Yeah.
Women writers writing in English come late. You have to keep in mind that English, in the first place, education itself, formal education was denied to women. Leave alone English education and acquiring a foreign language. Yet there were some, especially from the Brahmo Samaj, or who converted to Christianity, who knew a little bit of English, but publishing in English comes later. Throughout the 19th century, there is a whole body of literature by women who are writing in the vernacular. In the many periodicals that are there, in newspapers, to the extent, this is a very interesting bit of information I read in a book. It is said that when Ramohan Roy was speaking against pooling, polygamy and Shoti, there were a whole lot of women from Chinsura who signed up a petition for Ramohan Roy and sent it to the newspapers to be published. So we did not have any sort of active feminist movement as such, but there was a voice in the vernacular, and a very, very strong voice. And most of these writings are about the condition of women. And the other line that we have to keep in mind is that these things were really meant for the upper middle classes and castes of women. When you come to the labor force, Bengal provided a huge labor force, both for men and women. The norms became totally different. So 2 or 3 authors I want to mention. One was Bama Sundari Devi. It's a sort of essay that she wrote. And the name of this is Kiki Kusanskar Tirohito Hole Ei Deshe Sri Briddhi Hoite Pare. What are the superstitions that must be got rid of if the country is to prosper. The point is the whole idea of the progress of a nation depends on the education of the women, and the condition in which the women are kept was a consciousness that was there, that we find in the vernacular writings. Now, this really is the beginning of a new modernity in Bengali women. The other text in English, which came out in 1872, this entire bibliography by of women writing in Bengali, in Bengal in the 19th century, has this one entry where Kailash Bashini Devi, she is not to be confused with there was another Kailash Bashini Devi who traveled to England with her husband and came back with a book which was written in Bangla later on. She wrote 2 tracts. One was called Hindu Mohilaganer Hinabostha, the condition of Bengali women. The second is interesting. This is Hindu Obolakuler Vidyabhash, which came out in 1872, a 40-page book, which she herself translated into English. She first wrote it in Bangla and then put it in English. Even in Rammohon, we find the second advocate for concremation, which was a reply to a Hindu Orthodox Pandit, is from Bangla, then English. And she translated it as such, Hindu female education and its progress. The other, because I usually read about non-fiction prose, you have definitely Toru Oruda, later on Sarojini Naidu, who are writing. The one autobiography I will like to mention is Shuniti Devi's autobiography, who is the eldest daughter of Keshav Chandra Sen, the granddaughter of Sharda Sundari Devi, was married into the Kuch Bihar royal family. And the autobiography that she wrote is in English. Perhaps this is the first autobiography in English by an Indian woman. It was published sometime in 1929 from London, at a point of time when she had accompanied her husband to London. And if we read at least the even the content page, we know that it is meant for a Western reading public. Like she's trying to talk about her romance with the man she will get married. Her early married life. There's a honeymoon, something that is that was unthinkable in early 20th century. And then she talks about the Indian festivals, about Holi. The point is, what I want to make is a text like this will definitely show you that she's not a representative of the average Indian woman. The representation of the woman comes in vernacular, and a very strong and authentic representation. Thank you.
Ma'am, so as a rider to the question, since we are really,
Sorry, I can't follow you.
Yeah, can you listen to me, ma'am? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So, ma'am, as a rider to the question that I just asked you, because we are really pressed for time and we have to break for lunch. So, yeah. So, can you just you were saying when we were having this chat that you will be reading out a passage, a little passage from a book. So, can you do that in just a few minutes?
A passage from a book.
Indian Princess or something like that.
About the passage, I have the book in hand, but because of constraint of time, I think.
Yeah. But just can you read it in just a little bit, because that will be really wonderful.
This is the book Autobiography of an Indian Princess, Memoirs of Maharani Shuniti Devi of Kuch Bihar. A very interesting part of the autobiography is a section which is about the correspondence between Keshav Chandra Sen and the British government is just put into the autobiography, which was this marriage created a great upheaval in Bengal and led to the split in the Brahmo Samaj over the age of consent. See, lines such as this, a chapter called My Romance. Indian women usually did not talk about their conjugal lives, even within family. Now, to talk about it in public and get it published, it was radical, definitely, but as I said, not representative of the Indian woman. My happy home life continued until I was 30. Indian girls of that age are more advanced than their Western sisters. But I was still very much a child, thanks to my parents. And then she says, my fairy prince in my romance was the young Ripendra Narayan Bhuk Bahadur, Maharaja of Kuch Bihar, who had been a ward of the British government since his infancy and carefully educated to be a model ruler. Colonel Hutton wrote, ever since I have become commissioner for Kuch Bihar, the honor of the young Maharaja, his future happiness, the welfare of the state have been under my anxious care. And as she progresses with the text, with her marriage life, she goes on to talk about things of her very happy life that she enjoyed, something that is not found anywhere else, I think, in Indians, women's literature of the 19th and early 20th centuries. But what is far more important as a social document is this correspondence between the British government and Keshav Chandra Sen, the letters that were written between the two, because it was Keshav Chandra Sen who had pleaded for the age of consent to increase the age of cohabiting with the husband in court. And apparently his own daughter had not reached yet that age. So there, as I said, there was a terrible upheaval throughout Bengali society regarding this marriage, and this entire problem as a social tract is put there in the text.
Thank you so much, madam. So my next question to Professor, actually this is my last question to Professor Akwanya. After that, we will take just one question each for you from our respected listeners and who are joining us in the YouTube live. So Professor Akwanya, if you can just talk about the Black theatre and how is it contributing to the Centre-Marching Order. I know it's a huge area, but if you can just zero in on maybe on 20th century or maybe to our times and talk about how Black theatre is responding to the Centre-Marching conflict. Yeah, sir, you're on mute. Kindly unmute yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, of course we have Black theatre in America, and we have African theatre as well. Now, at a certain stage, the 1960s, 70s, Black American theatre was really attempting to participate in the struggle to regain self-respect for the black man, or the black population in America. So that was a big thing, and the rest of literature also, to some extent, tried to participate. One play that is on my mind right now is Amiri Barak, Dutchman, Dutchman, in which we have the black situation portrayed in an humdrum situation of a railway carriage, the underground carriage, and what we see there is that the situation of the black is desperate. The white, the dominant white, the white society, the hegemonic white society, used every opportunity, to revalidate its dominance, in which the black was the order, and the white was the center. George Bush, not very long ago, scolded his fellow Republicans who were still looking for these values, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, and male society. All right. So criticize them. His thinking is rather that the time for that has gone, but it's not clear that it has gone. The story in Dutchman, we have Clay, the black man who is sitting apart in the railway carriage, reading a news magazine, and that arouses the slave master tension in the mind of Lula, the female. This reading of a news magazine and being on his own, apparently absorbed in his own world, was itself resistance. And this resistance had to be crushed. So this very ordinary situation, but it flicks up the racial tensions. And the white woman, Lula, tries to manipulate Clay in racial terms to give him assignments, including a relationship with herself and all that. This would be assigned, and Clay never comes along, and that is itself again resistance. The speech he makes, in which he discusses the situation of the black man in American society, whether he's a successful entertainer or not, as a matter of falling in line with the code of behavior which this racial relationship set up. That again is considered to be objectionable, in fact, resistance by Lula. And so these resistances have got to be punished by execution. And she does it, in a matter-of-fact way, without any, if you like, justifying circumstance. It stabs him to death and gives order that the body be removed. And this is arbitrary, but it is normal, and in fact a service to the hegemonic society. It reaffirms, revalidates its dominance. So it plays into an issue that kept coming up in black writing in the 70s and 80s about what's the point of all this writing? somebody observed that no verse, no poem ever stopped at 3/8. So, and even when it comes to writing, there are tons and tons of words, but none of it mine. So if even to express one's resistance, one has to do it in a language that is not one's own. And so the question was coming up again and again: what was the point of all this? What was this writing yielding for the black people? So one solution was to perform. That writing should perform. It should not just be speaking, but it should perform. The text should perform. The writer should be a performance, and all that. And the practical utility of that is neither here nor there. The change, in my view, that has happened is thanks to the social media. So the right now the social media has made it, has created a situation where the experiences of the black experience, as they call it, in America, has a chance of being discussed and perhaps something done about it. That is the situation now, but it is thanks to the social media. Because in Nigeria, we have a great dramatist like Wole Soyinka. One of his great plays is Death and the King's Horseman. And Death and the King's Horseman is an interplay of tradition and and white authority, the authority of the colonist, so that the King's Horseman election is officially the person who looks after the king's horses, and particularly the one that he rides. And the story is that this man, if the king dies, he must die as well, in order to serve his sovereign in the other world. And so the king dies in the King and Death and the King's Horseman, and the white man intervenes, and in order to prevent this ritual event from happening, this ritual suicide by the election from happening. It's a complicated play in which the election's son, who is a favorite of the white district officer, but is studying in England, once he hears that his father has died, he comes home unannounced, apparently to bury his father, because once he hears that the king has died, he knows that means that his father is also dying, going to die. Therefore, he comes to bury his father, and only to find that the white man Pilkins has arrested his father to prevent him from committing this ritual suicide. So we have this center in the traditional format, where near the traditional society, the white man as the outpost of empire is located, and from this spot, decisions now flow, law flows, and there is therefore a conflict between traditional law, which would have obliged election to kill himself, is in conflict with the white man's law, which forbids suicide, and therefore wants to transform. Is the process of transforming of society from traditional to modern, quote and unquote, in which the law is from this center. the colonial center. So in the upshot, the white man is not able to prevent the election from killing himself. He contrives to kill himself even with the chains that he has been chained with, because his son finding that he has not yet killed himself, commits suicide, and so he thinks that is no longer worthy of life, and kills himself also. So the chain, the pattern that the white man wants to stop, he has not succeeded in doing that yet. Maybe he will fight it another day, but for now, the center has not prevailed. But that is the tension in between the center and the margin. It's there at every point. Sometimes the center is thwarted. At other times it prevails. But the struggle goes on in this traditional place. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. So since we are really pressed for time, so I'll just take one question each for the two speakers coming from the YouTube chat box. So I'm sort of punching two questions for Professor Bandyopadhyay. Questions coming from Deboshmita Dotto and Rehana Parveen. So they're basically trying to ask is, how is the anxiety of language working while representation is happening in Indian writing in English, especially writings coming out of Bengal? And Deboshmita specifically points out to a letter which Michael Madhusudan Dotto had written to the editor of Bentley's Miscellany, which exposes his anxiety of being accepted by the English literary public. So if you can throw some light on that very briefly, madam.
See, Michael, even Bankim had that problem. Bankim had also mentioned that if Michael goes on to write in English, his literature will never live. Now, there was anxiety, the sort of anxiety of writing in English, or the anxiety of Indianness that you find in 20. But what I wanted to say was the anxiety of Indianness is something that you find in 20th century literature. Even when Mulkraj Anand met Mahatma Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi had told Mulkraj Anand to stop writing in English and turn to the vernacular. Now, appropriating a language, using it, and being a part, you have to keep in mind that most of these Western educated elite had a part in official administrative matters as well. Okay, so that the anxiety that you have in a 20th century Indian writing in English is something not found in the anxiety in the writing that you have in 19th century Indian writing in English.
All right. Thank you so much, madam, for that. So this is a question coming, again, I'm punching three questions together coming from Joshomati Ghosh, Warisha Kamran, and Dr. Sahu. So Dr. Akwanya, what they're basically asking is, how is language contributing to the question of resistance? And I think Joshomati is talking about Tutuola's writing and the magic realist techniques in those writings. So therefore, how is the question of language contributing to the question of resistance to the white colonizer? Sir, please unmute yourself.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Well, as I said, the debate in 1962 over language has not been resolved yet. It has not been resolved. Even if one party is dominant, the party that thinks of literature as messaging. So the consequence of this is that for this part, what is important is the message. And this message can be taken from one language and put into another. So that language is not an issue. It's not an issue. It's the message. You can translate it into the vernacular. You can put it in French. You can put it in another language. As long as you can move the message around. So so some of our writers brushed aside Obiwale's concerns. These things that didn't matter, and what was important was to be able to convey the message. Now, so for them, this part, language is not an issue at all, and you can, what is at issue is the message. But for some like Ngugi, it is an issue. He does agree with Obiwale that if it is African literature and it is in a non-African language, it's not African literature. So his own response is to write in Swahili, in Kiswahili, and then the risk that he has already run is that he is reaching a very small audience. Very few people outside his Kiswahili enclave can read Kiswahili. So these writings in Kiswahili are being translated into English so that it can reach a wider audience. And the dominant view is that language is a tool. The tool people can use to do anything, and the situation is made more difficult because the nations that the colonists set up always involved agglomerations of disparate ethnic nationalities. So some big, in Nigeria there are 3 big ethnic nationalities: Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo. But there are more than 400 others, some very small, some, and so language has a very practical meaning in a situation like that. English is taken to be necessary for this country to hold together as a country. So English is the official language of the country, but the 3 major languages are also taught. But the 3 major languages do not by any means capture the variety of the linguistic variety in Nigeria. If you want to be fair to the ethnicities, you would have to recognize each ethnic language. Some of them are so small that you are talking about thousands of people, not even a million. Yeah. So then English is taken as a practical solution to a problem, and we see then in the teaching of English in the Nigerian educational system, English is taught as grammar. That is how English is understood, grammar. Now, literature, they speak of literature in English. Literature in English. But English is grammar. So they probably solve the problem of they claim that we have our own literature, and even if it is in English, it's our literature. But the linguistic purists will say, if it is in English, it's not your literature. It is English literature, right? And so that problem remains. It's not solved. The dominant view is that there's no problem. But if you look at it closely, the problem exists. Yes. So literature is not yet able, by and large, to solve this tension, this linguistic tension. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I mean, this was a very, very enthralling session. I must say that I have attended so many seminars and so many webinars, but I have hardly seen a session this enlightening. I think this is being streamed in the YouTube across the world, and I think we should refer to this session for ages to come, because this has been one of the most enthralling sessions I have ever seen in my life. Thank you so much, Professor Akwanya, for joining all the way from Nigeria. Thank you, Professor Bandyopadhyay, madam. It's almost an embarrassment to talk to Professor Bandyopadhyay in such a formal way, because she has been such a wonderful professor, and we are actually very close. So when we meet, face to face, we don't talk like this, right? but it's so wonderful. I think this has been a brilliant session after that mesmerizing keynote address by Dr. Biswas. So thank you very much for joining. So that's where we conclude. I will just make a little announcement that the next session with Professor Ayla Orkusa starts at 2:15, which is around 15 minutes from now. So thank you very much. We conclude the session.
Thanks to your college and Puras Kanpur College for inviting us.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. We conclude the session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very well managed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yes. Okay.